There are things in life that you only understand once you've crossed the threshold of your 70s. For example, that relatives are not always a blessing, especially when it comes to those you get through your children's marriages. My name is Ebner Yablonsky. I am 72 years old, and I am the former owner of Yablonsky Reliable Building Materials, the largest building materials warehouse in Flint, Michigan. My story began many years ago when I, a native of a Polish working-class family, started my business in 1978. At that time, Flint was still a thriving industrial center, with General Motors factories providing jobs for half the city. I saw Flint flourish, and then watched it slowly fade away as the factories began to close one by one. But my business survived. People always need building materials, especially when they are trying to maintain their crumbling homes in a dying city. By the time I turned 68, I decided I'd had enough. I sold the business to a young, enthusiastic couple from Detroit who wanted to restore Flint to its former glory. I doubt they'll succeed, but that's no longer my concern. I found myself with a substantial amount of money that needed to be invested somewhere. Of course, I could have bought some boring securities or put the money in a bank deposit, but after 4 decades of running my own business, I wasn't attracted to the prospect of passive income. I wanted a project, something that would keep my hands and mind busy and prevent me from sinking into the quagmire of aimless existence in which many retirees drown. And then I saw an advertisement for a luxurious house for sale on the shores of Lake Michigan, 3 hours drive from Flint. It was an old mansion built in the late 19th century for some industrial magnate, with 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a huge living room overlooking the lake, and 2 acres of land. The price was ridiculous, considering the potential value of such a property. But there was one significant caveat. The house needed serious renovation. This became my project. Using my connections in the construction industry and the knowledge I had accumulated over years of work, I took on the restoration. It took almost a year and a third of the money from the sale of the business, but the result exceeded all expectations. The house became a real gem, a combination of Victorian architecture with modern amenities, elegant furniture, and antique interior details. I put a piece of my soul into every little detail. Initially, I planned to move there and enjoy a well-deserved retirement on the shores of a picturesque lake. But two circumstances changed my plans. First, I realized that I didn't want to leave Flint, despite all its problems. Most of my life has been spent here. My Helena is buried here, and I know every corner of this place. Second, when real estate agent Darla Kincaid came to see the house, she told me that such a property could be rented for at least $1,000 a night during the high season. "Mr. Yablonsky," she said, adjusting her bright red hair, "with a house like this, you'll have an annual income greater than what many people earn in 10 years in this state." And she was right. I kept my old house in Flint and turned the lakefront mansion into a profitable business. Of course, there were maintenance costs, taxes, and utility bills, but even after all the deductions, the income was still impressive, especially on holidays when the rental rate skyrocketed to $1,500 a night. However, it wasn't just about the money. I enjoyed taking care of the house, keeping an eye on its condition, and planning small improvements. Every 2 weeks, I would go there, take inventory, chat with Bertha, the local woman I hired to clean, and feel like I was still in control of something meaningful. It seemed like the perfect situation for a retiree. But there was one person who managed to poison my existence even from a distance. My brother-in-law, Thorne Rittenhouse. Thorne entered my life 15 years ago when my only daughter, Meredith, who worked as an accountant for an insurance company, announced her engagement. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. She brought home a tall man with perfect hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, this is Thorne." "We're getting married," she said with an expression on her face, as if she expected my disapproval. I didn't feel disapproval. I felt a vague uneasiness, the nature of which I couldn't determine. There was something about this man that made my instincts scream danger. Maybe it was the way he looked around my house with poorly concealed disappointment, or maybe it was the way he casually pushed Helena's photo aside on the dresser to put down his glass of water. But what could I say? Meredith was 34, a grown woman, and to be honest, I was afraid she would be left alone after her mother's death and my inevitable departure. I wanted her to have a family of her own. So I smiled, shook Thorne's hand, and pretended not to notice the warning signs. The wedding was modest, attended mainly by Thorne's relatives. Most of our friends and relatives had already left Flint in search of a better life by that time. I paid for everything, from the venue rental to the honeymoon in the Bahamas. It was my gift to my daughter, and I didn't regret it. But I noticed how Thorne's parents, Obadiah and Lettuce Rittenhouse, exchanged smug glances when they thought I wasn't looking. After the wedding, the situation only got worse. Thorne worked as an appraiser at the same insurance company where Meredith worked, but his demands far exceeded their combined income. A new car every 3 years, designer clothes, membership in a prestigious country club. And of course, most of these expenses fell on my shoulders. "Dad, we're a little tight on money this month," Meredith would say on the phone. "Could you?" I always agreed, partly because of her. I didn't want my daughter to go without anything. Partly out of pride, I didn't want people to think that the daughter of a successful businessman was living in straitened circumstances. And perhaps partly out of guilt. After Helena's death, I threw myself into my work, leaving my daughter's upbringing to nannies and school teachers. But with each passing year, these requests became more frequent and less subtle. Thorne stopped pretending that the money was needed for something urgent or necessary. Now they were simply demands. "Ebner," he would say, dropping the Mr. and father-in-law, "we need $20,000 to renovate the kitchen. And don't try to tell me you don't have that kind of money. We all know how much you make at your warehouse." I gave it to him. Every time I gave it to him, swallowing my resentment and irritation. I told myself I was doing it for Meredith, that I was too old to start conflicts, that in the end, it was just money, and I could afford it. But after I sold my business and bought a house by the lake, the situation took a new turn. Thorne didn't hear about my purchase from me. I didn't think it was necessary to tell him, rightly believing that it was my personal business. He found out from mutual acquaintances and called me immediately. "Ebner, you bought a house by the lake and didn't tell us?" His voice was filled with undisguised indignation. "Meredith is very upset." I doubted that Meredith even knew about the call. In recent years, she had become increasingly distant from me, retreating into the shadow of her domineering husband. "It's an investment, Thorne," I replied calmly. "I plan to rent it out." "Ridiculous," he snorted. "At your age, getting into the rental business. You need to relax and enjoy life. Meredith and I would be happy to take over the management of the house just like that." He didn't even try to hide his intentions. He simply reached out for another of my assets as if he had every right to do so. "Thank you for the offer, but I can manage on my own," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. An awkward pause followed. "Well, in that case, I hope we can use the house sometimes. For weekends and holidays. We are family, after all." At that moment, I realized I'd had enough. It was my house, bought with my money, renovated according to my plans. I wasn't going to let Thorne and his family run the show there, leaving me with the repair bills. "The house will be available for rent through a real estate agency," I said firmly, "to all clients on the same terms." "Are you kidding?" His voice rose an octave. "You're going to charge your own daughter money to use your house?" "I'm going to run a business, Thorne. And yes, all clients will pay according to the established rates." He hung up without saying goodbye. 10 minutes later, Meredith called for the first time in several months. "Dad, what's going on?" "Thorne said you're refusing to let us use your new house. Is that true?" Her voice sounded concerned but not indignant. It was as if she simply wanted to hear my side of the story. "Meredith, sweetheart, I bought the house as an investment. It will bring me rental income. If you want to rent it, I'll be happy to let you, but on the same terms as everyone else." There was a pause, and I could almost feel her weighing my words, trying to decide whose side she was on. "Dad, we're family. Family doesn't charge family money." That phrase, delivered in a tone that reminded me of Thorne, was the last straw. I was tired of the manipulation, the guilt, the need to justify my decisions. "Meredith, I love you very much," I said quietly, "but this is my home and my business. I've spent a lot of time and money to make it a source of income for my retirement. I'm not going to give it away for free to anyone, not even you. And please tell Thorne that if he wants to discuss this, he should call me himself and not use you as a go-between." She hung up without saying goodbye. We didn't talk for the next 2 weeks, and I used that time to sign a contract with Darla Kincaid's real estate agency. They took care of all the work of finding clients, preparing documents, and collecting a 20% commission. That suited me perfectly. I didn't want to waste time on administrative matters. The first clients appeared almost immediately. A wealthy couple from Chicago looking for a secluded vacation spot. They stayed for a week and were so pleased that they booked the house for the following season. After them came others, families with children, groups of friends, even a small film studio shooting some kind of independent film. The business was thriving, and I felt satisfied that my project had been successful. Meredith called a month later, as if nothing had happened. She didn't apologize, but she didn't mention our conflict either. We returned to our usual pattern of communication, rare phone calls, even rarer visits, exchanging news without much emotion. Thorne stopped asking me for money directly, but I knew that Meredith was still getting instructions from him to borrow a certain amount from her father. I didn't refuse her. After all, she was my daughter, and I wanted her to be happy. But I stood firm on the lake house. It was my property, my business, and my boundary, which I had finally learned to defend. It wasn't that Thorne didn't try to cross that boundary. Oh, he tried. He called me several times to inquire about available dates at the house, hinting that he and Meredith could come for the weekend. I invariably referred him to Darla Kincaid for reservations. He never followed through, always finding some excuse. And I thought that was the end of it, that I had finally set boundaries that even Thorne wouldn't dare cross. How wrong I was. By the end of my first year with Darla Kincaid's agency, my rental income had exceeded my wildest expectations. The mansion was booked almost every weekend from May to October, and during the summer months, it was rarely empty even on weekdays. Customer reviews were 5-star, many returned again and again, and some even tried to book it months in advance. "Mr. Yablonsky, your house is our most sought-after property," Darla told me during our quarterly meeting at a cafe in downtown Flint. "If we had 10 more houses like this, we'd be millionaires." I smiled as I sipped my black coffee. So I made the right investment? More than that, especially considering the holiday seasons. You wouldn't believe how much people are willing to pay to spend Thanksgiving or Christmas in a place like this. She was right. When the winter holidays arrived, demand for the house skyrocketed. Families from all over the Midwest wanted to celebrate Christmas in an idyllic lakeside setting with a crackling fireplace, snowy landscapes outside the window, and a 6-foot Christmas tree in the spacious living room. I raised the price to $1,500 per night, and that didn't scare customers away. On the contrary, the house was booked for the entire holiday season by early November. All this success required a certain amount of effort on my part. I regularly visited the house, checked the condition of the furniture and appliances, updated the interior, and supervised the work of the cleaning lady and gardener. This was not a burden for me. Rather, it was a pleasant activity that gave my days structure and purpose. I even started keeping a journal, recording all expenses and income, planning future improvements, and noting particularly successful ideas that guests liked. The business grew and prospered, as did my bank account. I even began to think about buying a second property, perhaps a small cottage in the mountains for ski enthusiasts. But before I had a chance to seriously explore this idea, November of my second year of owning the lake house arrived. It was a cold, gray day, typical of late autumn in Michigan. I was sitting in my office, sorting through bills and planning New Year's decorations for the house, when the phone rang. Thorne's number lit up on the screen, and I felt my muscles tense involuntarily. We hadn't spoken in months, and I couldn't imagine what could have prompted him to call me directly instead of going through Meredith. "Thorne," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Ebner," he exclaimed with unexpected warmth. "How is my favorite father-in-law doing?" The false enthusiasm in his voice made me even more wary. In the 15 years I had known him, Thorne had never asked about my well-being unless he wanted something from me. "Fine," I replied curtly. "To what do I owe the call?" He laughed as if I had said something funny. "Always straightforward, aren't you? That's one of the traits I appreciate in you." He paused, then got down to business. "Listen, I have some great news. Meredith and I have decided to have a big family gathering for Christmas. To bring everyone together, to recreate the spirit of a real family holiday." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. He didn't keep me waiting long. "So we thought your house by the lake would be the perfect place for it. It's spacious, beautiful, with a view of the lake. Can you imagine the photos we'll take for the family album? I felt my heart begin to beat faster, but not with joy, but with a sense of impending conflict. The house is booked for the entire Christmas holiday, Thorne. Since the beginning of November, there was a pause, and I could almost physically feel the atmosphere of the conversation change. Cancel it, he said in a tone that brooked no argument. This is a family matter, Ebner. What could be more important than family? I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. I can't cancel the reservation, Thorne. I have a contract with the clients. They've already paid a deposit. It's unprofessional and could damage the reputation of the business. Business, he drawled with undisguised irritation. You've always put your precious business above family, even above Meredith. It was a low blow, and I felt anger rising inside me. But I held back. Years of managing the warehouse had taught me not to make decisions when I was emotional. That's not fair, Thorne, and you know it. If you want to spend Christmas at my house, you need to book in advance, just like everyone else. In advance? His voice rose an octave. You want your own daughter to plan her visit to your house months in advance? I want everyone who uses my business to respect the established rules, I replied firmly. There was a long pause, and I thought he had hung up when I heard his voice suddenly change. Now it sounded almost pleading. Listen, Ebner, I didn't want to tell you this, but Mer's parents are very upset that you've been distant lately. She cries at night, thinking her father no longer wants to be part of our lives. I clenched my teeth. Mer was my daughter, and I knew her better than anyone. She never cried at night, even when she was a child and had nightmares. And she certainly wouldn't cry because she couldn't spend Christmas in a particular house. Don't use my daughter as a tool for manipulation, Thorne, I said quietly. That's low, even for you. I'm not manipulating her, he protested. I'm just trying to save our family. You know what? Forget it. We'll find another place to celebrate. And when Mer asks why we can't be at your wonderful house by the lake, I'll just tell her the truth, that her father chose money over family ties. I felt my anger give way to exhaustion. This emotional roller coaster was too much for a man my age. Do as you see fit, Thorne, I said and hung up the phone. For the next few days, I was on pins and needles, waiting for a call from Meredith with reproaches and accusations. But the phone remained silent. Instead, on Wednesday evening, just as I was about to go to bed, a message came from Thorne. Ebner, I've thought it over and decided you're right. Business is business. I'm ready to book your house for our family for the Christmas holidays from December 23rd to 27th. Tell me how much it will cost and I'll transfer the money. I reread the message twice, not believing my eyes. It was so unlike Thorne to admit someone else was right, let alone agree to pay. Something was wrong here, but I couldn't figure out what it was. In the morning, I called Darla to check the status of the reservations for those dates. December 23rd to 27th, she asked. We had a reservation for those dates from the Anderson family, but they just canceled it last night. Something to do with the head of the family's work. So those dates are available, if you're interested. I frowned. Coincidence? Or had Thorne somehow contacted the Andersons and convinced them to cancel their reservation? It seemed unlikely, but I couldn't rule anything out when it came to my brother-in-law. Darla, my brother-in-law wants to book the house for those dates for a family Christmas celebration, I said. What's the rate for that period? $1,500 per night, she replied, considering that it's peak season and the holiday season. That's the standard rate for all customers. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to just say no to Thorne, find some excuse and not deal with him. But another part, the more rational part, said that didn't make sense. If I turned him down after insisting on equal treatment for everyone, it would look like a personal vendetta. Besides, this was really a business matter, not my personal relationship with my son-in-law. Okay, book those dates for Thorne Rittenhouse, I finally said. Standard terms, standard payment, everything as usual. No problem, Darla replied. I'll send him the contract and payment instructions today. I hung up, but the unpleasant feeling lingered. Something about this situation bothered me, some unaccounted-for factor that I couldn't see. In the evening, I called Meredith, deciding to check my suspicions directly. Hi, Dad, she answered after the third ring. Sorry I didn't call. I was busy at work. No problem, sweetheart, I said. Just wanted to see how you were doing. We talked about the weather, her job, my health, the usual topics for our rare conversations. Then, as if in passing, I asked, Thorne told me about your plans for Christmas. A big family gathering, right? There was a pause during which I could almost physically feel her confusion. Plans for Christmas? She asked. We haven't discussed it in detail yet. Is Thorne planning something? My heart sank. So Thorne hadn't told her about his plans. That didn't bode well. He wants to rent my lake house for the holidays, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. For your whole family. Really? Her voice sounded genuinely surprised. He didn't tell me about that. But that sounds wonderful, Dad. I've wanted to see your house for a long time. I frowned. In the 2 years since I had bought the house, Meredith had never once expressed a desire to visit. It wasn't that I hadn't invited her. She just always found some excuse not to come. You can come any time, sweetheart, I said. You don't have to wait for Christmas or a special invitation. Thanks, Dad, she replied, a note of guilt in her voice. It's just work, always so busy. We ended the conversation with promises to talk more often, which I knew would remain just promises. After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair, deep in thought. What was Thorne up to? Why had he decided to rent a house without discussing it with Myrith? And who was the whole family he had mentioned? As far as I knew, they didn't have a tradition of large family gatherings at Christmas. They usually spent the holidays with Thorne's parents at their house in the suburbs of Detroit. Over the next week, I heard nothing from Thorne or Darla. I was beginning to think Thorne had changed his mind when my phone rang on Saturday morning. Mr. Yablonsky, Darla's voice sounded unusually tense. We have a small issue with your son-in-law's reservation. What kind of situation? I asked, feeling that familiar anxiety returning. He's made some changes to his original request. Now he wants to book the house for 10 nights, from December 20th to 30, and for 14 people instead of 4, as originally stated. I whistled. 14 people? The house was designed for a maximum of 10 guests, and even then with some discomfort. That's too many people for the house, Darla. And too long a stay. Christmas bookings don't usually exceed 5 nights. I know, Mr. Yablonsky. I told him the same thing. But he insists. He said it's a special occasion and that you would surely agree, considering it's a family event. I felt something snap inside me. This was too much. Thorne was trying to manipulate me again, using family ties as leverage. What will the total cost be for this reservation? I asked, already knowing that the figure would be impressive. At the standard rate of $1,500 per night, it will be $15,000, Darla replied, plus a deposit for possible damage, considering the number of guests. Another $2,000. That's $17,000 in total. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside me. And he agrees to pay that amount? Not exactly, Darla replied cautiously. He suggested an alternative. He said that since you are his father-in-law and effectively a member of the family, it would be fair to give him a substantial discount. Or even, she paused, free accommodation. So that's it. Now I understood Thorne's plan. He never intended to pay rent for the house. All this time, he had been planning to use family connections to get the house for free, and for a longer period, and for more people than the standard terms allowed. Darla, I said, feeling an unusual calmness replace the storm of emotions. Accept Mr. Rittenhouse's reservation for the dates he specified and for the number of people he specified. But Mr. Yablonsky, she objected, the house is not designed for that many guests. And, I know, I interrupted her, but that's my problem. Accept the reservation, but on one condition, no discounts. Standard rate, standard terms, standard payment terms. Are you sure? Her voice sounded doubtful. It could create tension in the family. I smiled. The tension is already there, Darla, and it wasn't created by me. Just follow standard procedures. And one more thing. I paused, considering my next move. What I was about to do was risky. It could ruin my relationship with my daughter and son-in-law forever. But then again, hadn't that relationship already been ruined by years of manipulation and disrespect? Don't send the bill in advance, I finally said. I want them to receive it on the last day of their stay, before they leave. But that's not our usual practice, Darla objected. We always require prepayment or at least a security deposit. I know, I said, but in this case, I personally guarantee payment. If my brother-in-law refuses to pay, I will cover the expenses out of my own pocket. There was a long pause. I could almost see Darla thinking about my words, weighing the risks and trying to understand my motives. "All right, Mr. Yablonsky," she finally said. "We'll do as you ask. But I must say, I don't quite understand." "I'll explain later, Darla," I interrupted gently. "Just trust me on this one." Hanging up the phone, I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt neither anger, disappointment, nor fatigue from Thorne's constant manipulation. Instead, I felt anticipation. Thorne wanted to trap me, forcing me to either refuse his request and look like a heartless father, or agree to his terms and lose a significant amount of money. But instead, I decided to trap him. I felt no malice or desire for revenge. It was more a sense of justice, a long-awaited balance in our relationship. Thorne had to understand that the world did not revolve around him and his desires, that actions have consequences, that boundaries exist to be respected. Over the next week, I carefully planned every detail. I contacted Bertha and asked her to prepare the house for the arrival of a large group, to replace the bedding in all the bedrooms, buy extra towels, and replenish the toiletries. I even ordered an extra folding bed to be installed in the study so that all the guests could be accommodated in relative comfort. I instructed Darla on how to greet the guests, which keys to give them, and which rules to explain. Everything had to look like a normal house rental without any hint of special conditions or relationships. Finally, most importantly, I prepared the bill. Formal, detailed, listing all services and their costs. 10 nights at $1,500 each, plus an additional fee for exceeding the standard number of guests, plus a deposit for possible damage. Total, just over $17,000. I placed the bill in an elegant folder with the real estate agency's logo and sealed it in an envelope. I put the envelope in my desk drawer, waiting for the moment when it would be needed. The anticipation was almost sweet. I imagined the look on Thorne's face when he received the bill. His indignation, his attempts at manipulation, his inevitable realization that this time his plan had failed. December 20th was frosty and clear, with that special winter light that makes everything look like a Christmas card. I arrived at the lake house 3 hours before the guests were due to arrive to personally check that everything was ready for their arrival. Bertha had outdone herself. The house was sparkling clean, the fireplaces were neatly stacked with firewood, and a small selection of food for the first dinner was waiting in the refrigerator. "Everything is as you requested, Mr. Yablonsky," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "The bedding is fresh, the towels are new, and I even put a live fir tree in the living room, just as you like." I thanked her and wrote her a check with a bonus for her excellent work. She deserved it. Preparing the house for 14 people was no easy task. When Bertha left, I went around the house again, checking every little detail. I turned the heating up to a comfortable temperature, checked the firewood supply, and made sure all the light bulbs were working. At the last minute, I even placed small gift baskets with local delicacies in the bedrooms, a common practice for my tenants during the holiday season. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when winter twilight was already beginning to descend on the snow-covered landscape, I heard the sound of cars approaching. Looking out the window, I saw a whole cavalcade, 3 large SUVs and 1 minivan filling the parking lot in front of the house. People of all ages, from teenagers to the elderly, poured out of them like peas from a pod. I took a deep breath, put on my best smile, and went out onto the porch to greet the guests. The first to approach me was, of course, Thorne, in an expensive cashmere coat and with that confident smile I knew so well. "Ebner," he exclaimed, opening his arms. "What a surprise. I didn't expect to see you here." I gave him a restrained hug, noting the insincerity in his words. Of course he expected to see me. This was my house, and he knew very well that I checked on it regularly. "I decided to make sure everything was ready for your arrival," I replied. "How was your trip?" "Fine, fine." He waved it off and turned to the others. "Ebner, do you remember my parents, Obadiah and Lettuce?" How could I forget? Obadiah Rittenhouse, a tall, thin man with a perpetually dissatisfied expression, and his wife Lettuce, a petite woman with a sharp gaze and thin lips pressed together in constant disapproval. They approached the porch, treading carefully on the snow-covered path, as if afraid of dirtying their expensive shoes. "Mr. and Mrs. Rittenhouse," I nodded. "Welcome. Finally, we get to see this famous house, Lettuce squeaked, casting a critical eye over the facade. Thorne has told us so much about it. I hope the reality doesn't disappoint you, I replied with a slight irony that they, of course, didn't catch. Following Thorne's parents were his sister Gwyneth, with her husband Roger, and their teenage twins, Felicity and Finley. Gwyneth was the female version of Thorne, the same haughty gaze, the same fake smile. Her husband, a heavy-set man with thinning hair, looked as if he had been dragged here against his will. The twins, both with earbuds in their ears and smartphones in their hands, didn't even look up when they were introduced. And this is my brother Esmond, with his wife Prue and their children, Thorne continued, pointing to the next group. Esmond was the complete opposite of Thorne. Short, stocky, with an open face and a sincere smile. His wife Prue, a full-figured woman with kind eyes, shook my hand warmly. Their children, 9-year-old Dakota and 7-year-old Garrison, were the only ones who showed genuine excitement at the sight of the snow-covered house by the lake. And finally, my cousins, Thorne concluded, Arlo and his wife Vanessa, and Phoebe and her husband Chad. Arlo, a tall man with a military bearing, nodded to me with restrained respect. His wife Vanessa, a slender blonde in an expensive fur coat, barely glanced at me before heading straight for the house. February, a pretty middle-aged woman, smiled at me and introduced her husband Chad, a sturdy man with a weather-beaten face who shook my hand firmly. "Where's Meredith?" I asked, not seeing my daughter among them. "Oh, she'll be here tomorrow," Thorne replied casually. "She's stuck at work. End of the year. You know how it is." I nodded, though inside I felt a pang of disappointment. I had hoped that Meredith would be among the first to arrive. I wanted to talk to her alone, to explain the situation. Now I would have to put that off. "Well, make yourselves comfortable," I said, pointing to the front door. "All the bedrooms are ready, and there's food for dinner in the fridge. If you need anything, call me anytime. Aren't you staying?" Esmond asked, and there was genuine disappointment in his voice. "Unfortunately, no," I replied. "I have business in Flint. But I'll stop by at Christmas to check that everything is in order." Thorne glanced at me quickly, his expression one of relief. Of course, he didn't want me to stay. It would interfere with his plans for complete control of the house. While the guests unloaded their luggage from the cars and assigned themselves to bedrooms, I watched them discreetly. It was interesting to see how people's characters manifested themselves in such simple actions. Obadiah and Lettuce immediately headed for the master bedroom without asking if they could stay there. Gwenny loudly commanded her husband, making him carry all their things. The twins threw their backpacks right in the hall, obviously expecting someone else to take them upstairs. Arlo methodically unloaded neatly packed suitcases, while Vanessa was already taking selfies in front of the house for social media. Only the Esmond family worked as a well-coordinated team. He carried the heavy items, Prue organized the children, and Dakota and Garrison enthusiastically helped by carrying their small backpacks. I waited until everyone had entered the house, then quietly drove away. I had no desire to watch them settle in. It would only increase my irritation. Instead, I returned to Flint, planning to come back only for Christmas with a surprise in store. Meredith called me the next day, apologizing for not being able to come with everyone else. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said. "We're so busy at the end of the year. But I'll come tomorrow, I promise." "It's okay, sweetie," I replied. "What do you think of Thorne's idea to gather all the relatives for Christmas?" There was a short pause. "To be honest, it was a surprise to me," she admitted. "I thought it would just be the four of us. You, me, Thorne, and maybe his parents. But then it turned out he invited the whole family. But that's a good thing, right? A big family celebration." I heard the uncertainty in her voice and realized that Meredith was no more excited about the idea than I was. "Of course, dear," I said, deciding not to upset her prematurely. "See you tomorrow." Over the next 2 days, I received regular updates from Bertha, who came every morning to tidy up the house and check that everything was in order. "They're all so demanding, Mr. Yablonsky," she complained on the phone, "especially that elderly couple, Mr. Rittenhouse's parents. They're never satisfied with anything. They criticize everything. And yesterday, one of the teenagers broke a vase in the living room, and no one even thought to clean up the pieces." I sighed, mentally adding the cost of the vase to the final bill. "Don't worry, Bertha. Just do your job as usual, and write down any damage you notice." Meredith arrived on December 23rd. She called me as soon as she got home. Dad, it's so beautiful here, she said admiringly. Why didn't you show me the house before? I invited you several times, I reminded her gently, but you were always busy. Yes, probably, she replied uncertainly. Anyway, I'm here now. It's a shame you're not with us. Thorne says you're only coming for Christmas. Yes, I have some business in Flint, I lied. In reality, I just didn't want to spend any more time with the Rittenhouse family than necessary. But I'll definitely be there on the 25th. I spent Christmas Eve alone in my house in Flint, remembering past Christmases with Helena and little Myrith. Back then, everything was simpler. No manipulation, no hidden motives, just sincere love and the joy of being together. I wondered where and when it all went wrong. Perhaps it was after Helena's death, when I threw myself into my work, leaving Meredith alone with her problems. Or maybe it was when I allowed Thorne into our lives without setting clear boundaries from the start. On Christmas morning, I woke up with the firm determination to see my plan through. I packed a pre-prepared envelope with the bill, a few gifts for Meredith and Esmond's children, the only ones who, in my opinion, deserve gifts, into the trunk and set off. When I pulled up to the house, it was already past noon. The snow that had fallen during the night had turned the surroundings into a real winter wonderland. Smoke rose from the chimney, the windows glowed with warm light, and a garland, probably hung by Esmond's children, twinkled on the porch. Inside the house, there was festive chaos. In the living room, a huge Christmas tree shone, decorated, in my opinion, too extravagantly, with a predominance of gold and purple tones, clearly chosen by Lettuce. Gift wrappings, half-eaten snacks, and empty glasses were scattered everywhere. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and appetizing smells wafted from the kitchen. Someone was preparing Christmas dinner. Dad! Meredith was the first to notice me and rushed to hug me. Merry Christmas. We thought you weren't coming. I hugged her back, enjoying the rare moment of closeness. Sorry I'm late. The roads weren't in the best condition after last night's snowfall. Ebner! Thorne emerged from the kitchen with a glass of whiskey in his hand. Merry Christmas. Join us. We're just about to start dinner. I noticed that he had already had quite a bit to drink. His movements were a little more exaggerated than usual, and his smile was too wide. The next few hours passed in a relatively peaceful atmosphere. Christmas dinner was plentiful. Turkey, baked potatoes, various sauces and side dishes, several kinds of desserts. Most of it was prepared by Prue, with a little help from Meredith and Feb. The other women, in their words, didn't like to fuss in the kitchen. During dinner, I had the opportunity to observe Thorne's relatives and their interactions more closely. Obadiah and Lettuce sat at the head of the table as if it were their home, constantly making comments. The food wasn't hot enough. The wine wasn't aged enough. Gwenny spent most of her time checking her phone, while her husband Roger quietly got drunk in the corner. Their twins, Felicity and Finley, refused to sit at the table at all, settling down on the sofa with their tablets. Arlo and Vanessa behaved as if they were doing everyone a favor by being there. They criticized everything from the choice of tableware to the temperature in the room. February was more reserved, but her husband Chad, after a few glasses, began telling inappropriate jokes loudly, drawing disapproving glances from Lettuce. Only the Esmond family seemed normal. Esmond himself was attentive to his wife, helping her with the serving and praising her culinary talents. Prue made sure everyone was fed, while not forgetting to keep an eye on her children. Dakota and Garrison behaved remarkably well for their age, politely thanking everyone for each dish and even trying to engage their older twin cousins in conversation. Meredith sat next to me, occasionally glancing anxiously at Thorne, who was becoming increasingly boisterous and unrestrained with each glass. I noticed that she had hardly drunk anything, limiting herself to one glass of wine for the entire evening. After dinner, everyone moved to the living room to exchange gifts. I gave Meredith an elegant silver bracelet that had once belonged to her mother, and Esmond's children received educational games, which they accepted with genuine enthusiasm. I had no gifts for the others, which caused some dissatisfied looks, especially from Lettuce. We didn't expect you to join us, Thorne commented on my choice of recipients. Otherwise, we would have prepared something for you, too. Don't worry, I replied with a smile. My gift is yet to come. He raised an eyebrow questioningly, but I didn't explain. The time had not yet come. The evening continued with songs by the fireplace, mostly performed by Prue and her children, games in which only half of the guests participated, and Obadiah's endless stories about his business successes, which became more and more incredible with each glass of whiskey. By midnight, most of the guests had retired to their rooms, leaving the living room in complete disarray. No one even thought to clear the table or wash the dishes. Apparently, that was considered Bertha's job. I stayed the night, settling into a small guest room on the first floor, which Thorne generously allocated to me in my own house. The next 4 days passed in a similar fashion. Hearty breakfasts, walks in the snowy surroundings, mainly for the children and more active adults, long lunches, afternoon rest, and evening gatherings by the fireplace. With each passing day, the mess in the house grew despite Bertha's daily visits. The guests behaved as if they were in a full-service hotel, not even bothering to do basic cleaning up after themselves. I was particularly upset when Finley accidentally spilled a cup of coffee on an antique rug, and no one, including his parents, even attempted to wipe up the stain. Or when Vanessa used one of my collectible books as a coaster for a hot mug, leaving an indelible mark on the cover. By the end of their stay, my house looked like a hurricane had swept through it. Furniture had been moved, new scratches appeared on the walls, and there were stains of unknown origin on the floor. One of the antique chairs was broken, and the crystal chandelier in the dining room was missing several pendants. Finally, December 30th arrived, the last day of the guest stay. Packing began in the morning, suitcases were carried out into the hall, and cars were driven closer to the porch. Thorne directed the process, giving instructions to everyone around him and not forgetting to criticize the slowness of some family members. I waited until most of the luggage had been packed and the guests had gathered in the living room for farewell coffee. Then I took the envelope with the prepared bill out of my bag and entered the room. "Before you leave," I said, drawing everyone's attention, "I have a small business matter to discuss." Thorne became alert, his smile fading slightly. "What is it, Ebner?" "Nothing serious, I hope." "Not at all," I replied, handing him the envelope. "Just a formality. The bill for renting the house for these 10 days. A dead silence fell over the room. All eyes were on Thorne, who held the envelope as if it were a snake ready to bite. "Bill?" he asked, his voice an octave higher than usual. "What bill?" "We're family, Ebner. Families don't bill each other." I smiled, feeling strangely calm. "Business is business, Thorne. You said it yourself, remember? When you booked the house through the real estate agency, you agreed to the standard rental terms. $1,500 a night, 10 nights, plus an additional fee for exceeding the number of guests, plus compensation for any damage. Everything is detailed in the invoice." Thorne opened the envelope, and his face began to change, going through all shades from pale pink to crimson as he read. $10,000? He finally exclaimed. "Are you out of your mind? We're your family. Meredith is your daughter." I nodded. That's exactly why I didn't include the cost of the broken antique chair and damaged chandelier in the bill. Otherwise, the amount would have been even higher. Obadiah rose from his seat, his face expressing extreme indignation. "This is outrageous," he thundered. "We came here at your invitation as guests, not as customers of some hotel." "No, Mr. Rittenhouse," I replied calmly. "You came here as tenants of a house that is my property and my business." Thorne was well aware of the terms when he booked the house. He signed a standard rental agreement through a real estate agency. Thorne gave me a withering look. "I never signed any contract. I just called and said we were coming." "Oh, but you did," I replied, taking a folded piece of paper out of my jacket pocket. "Here's a copy of the contract with your signature. Darla emailed it to you, and you returned a signed copy. Everything was above board." Meredith, who had been silently watching the proceedings, came over and took the document from my hands. She studied it carefully, then looked at Thorne. "That is indeed your signature," she said quietly, "and the rental price is clearly stated here. $1,500 per night." Thorne looked as if he had been punched in the gut. I didn't read the fine print," he muttered. "I thought it was just a formality, given our family ties." "Business is business," I repeated his words. "There are no exceptions for relatives. You said so yourself when I first refused to give you the house for free." Lettuce rose from her seat, her thin lips pressed into a thin line. "I always knew you were a mercenary man, Ebner Jablonski," she hissed, "but I didn't think you would stoop so low. Charging your own daughter." "I'm not charging my daughter. I'm charging the tenant of my house," I replied calmly. And if you're so upset, Mrs. Rittenhouse, I can offer you an alternative. You can choose not to pay the rent, but then I'll be forced to take you to court for breach of contract. And believe me, the legal costs will be much more expensive for you. A heavy silence hung in the room. I stood there, calmly looking at the indignant faces of the Rittenhouse family, and strangely felt relieved. For years, I had allowed them to walk all over me, using family ties as a tool of manipulation. But that would be no more. Listen, I began, addressing everyone present. I understand your outrage, but let's look at the situation objectively. This house is not just a place to relax. It's my business, my investment, my source of income. I've invested a significant portion of my savings, time, and labor in it. Thorne snorted, demonstratively crumpling the bill. Business, he drawled contemptuously. You're a retiree, Ebner. What the hell kind of business? You're just a greedy old man who doesn't want to share with his family. I took a deep breath, keeping my composure. Call it what you want, Thorne. But the fact remains that you rented this house under certain conditions. You signed a contract, and now you have to fulfill your obligations. This is ridiculous, Lettuce interjected, her thin lips trembling with indignation. We spent Christmas here as a family. This isn't some kind of business trip. And who decided it would be a family Christmas? I asked, turning to her. Thorne. He decided for everyone, without even asking me if I wanted 14 people in my house for the holidays. He just presented me with a fait accompli. Obadiah rose from his seat, his tall figure looming over me. You've always been petty, Yablonsky, he croaked, always counting every penny. No wonder Helena was so unhappy. It was a low blow, and I felt my composure beginning to crack. But I held back. Don't you dare talk about my wife, I said quietly but firmly. You don't know anything about her. Meredith, who had been silently watching the exchange, stepped between me and Obadiah. Please, let's all calm down, she said in a trembling voice. I'm sure we can resolve this civilly. Thorne shot her an irritated look. There's nothing to resolve, Meredith. Your father's out of his mind if he thinks we're going to pay $10,000 for spending Christmas at his house. Not his house, I corrected, but a property rented through a real estate agency. And not just spent Christmas, but occupied all the rooms for 10 days, used all the amenities, and damaged the property. All of that has a price. Ebner, Thorne's sister Gwyneth interjected, with the same haughty expression as her brother. You can't seriously expect us to pay such an outrageous amount? It's just ridiculous, I shrugged. In that case, as I said, the matter will be settled in court. I have a signed contract, I have witnesses, I have documents confirming the rental cost. Believe me, you will pay much more in court, taking into account legal costs, late payment penalties, and compensation for moral damages. Lettuce threw her hands up dramatically. Are you threatening us with court? Your own family. How can you do this to Meredith? I turned to my daughter, who stood with a lost expression on her face, clearly torn between loyalty to me and to her husband's family. Meredith has nothing to do with this, I said firmly. This is between me and Thorne. He made a commitment, and he has to honor it. This isn't charity, it's business. Business, Thorne mimicked me. All you can think about is money. What about family values? What about just enjoying the time we have together? I felt something inside me finally snap. All these years of pent-up anger, disappointment, and exhaustion from constant manipulation, it all came pouring out. Family values? I said quietly but with growing intensity. You want to talk about family values, Thorne? Okay, let's talk. For 15 years, you used me as an ATM. For 15 years, you manipulated my daughter, making her ask me for money for your whims. For 15 years, you treated me with contempt, barely concealed behind fake smiles and empty words. I took a step toward him, and he involuntarily backed away. You never respected me, Thorne. Not as a person, not as Meredith's father, not even as a successful businessman. To you, I was always just a source of money, a convenient resource to be used. And you know what's the saddest part? I let you do it. Out of love for Meredith, out of a desire to avoid conflict, out of fear of losing the only loved one I had left. The room fell silent. Even Obadiah and Lettuce, usually so confident, seemed at a loss for words. But there's a limit to everything, I continued. feeling a strange sense of relief from saying aloud everything that had been building up inside me for years. And you crossed it when you decided you could treat my home and my business as your own. When you decided you could bring 14 people here without my consent, occupy all the rooms, use all the resources, and all for free, because we're family. Meredith looked at me with wide eyes, which showed a mixture of shock and gradual realization. Dad, she began, but I gently raised my hand to stop her. No, sweetheart, let me finish. This needed to be said a long time ago. I turned back to Thorne, who stood with his fists clenched, a look of helpless rage on his face. So yes, Thorne, it's business. Not charity, not a family favor, but business. And either you pay the bill, or we'll see you in court. The choice is yours. The tense silence that followed my words was broken by an unexpected voice. It was Esmond, Thorne's brother, who had been silently watching the confrontation until that moment. He's right, Thorne, he said quietly but firmly. You can't just bring your whole family into someone else's house for 10 days and expect not to pay. Thorne turned sharply toward him, clearly not expecting betrayal from his own brother. Are you on his side? He exclaimed. Seriously, Esmond? Esmond shrugged, his open face expressing sincere regret, but also determination. I'm on the side of justice. We all knew this house was Ebner's business. You yourself told us that he was renting it out. And when you invited us here, I assumed you had agreed on some kind of compensation with him. We're family, Thorne exclaimed. Family doesn't charge family money, and family doesn't take advantage of family, Esmond's wife, Prue, replied quietly. Ebner is right, Thorne. All these years, you've treated him like an ATM. We all saw it, but no one dared say it to your face. To my surprise, Phoebe, Thorne's cousin, nodded too. I'm sorry, Thorne, but I agree with Esmond and Prue. You have to pay rent. It's only fair, her husband, Chad, added. Look, buddy, I wouldn't be happy either if someone brought 14 people into my house and expected free accommodation, especially considering how some of us. He glanced quickly at the twins, Finley and Felicity, who even now were glued to their phones, have treated his property. Thorne looked as if he had been betrayed by everyone he trusted. His gaze darted from one face to another, seeking support and finding only condemnation or awkward silence. This is ridiculous, he hissed finally. Have you all suddenly become so righteous? Just because the old man decided to make a scene? It's not a scene, Thorne, I said calmly. It's reality. You rented the house, you used it, now you have to pay. It's that simple. Obadiah, who had been unusually quiet until then, suddenly stood up. I'm not going to participate in this farce any longer, he declared. Lettice, we're leaving. Thorne, deal with this. Man yourself. Lettice stood up, pursing her lips, and followed her husband. They demonstratively left the room without saying goodbye to anyone. Gwenny and her husband Roger also hurried to leave, muttering something about needing to check if they had packed everything. Their twins simply walked out, their eyes glued to their gadgets. Arlo and Vanessa exchanged glances. Then Arlo cleared his throat. We'd better go get ready too, he said. Thorne, Meredith, see you in the parking lot. Soon only me, Thorne, Meredith, the Esmond family, and the married couple Feb and Chad remained in the room. Thorne, Feb said softly, just pay the rent. It's the right thing to do, Thorne shot her a withering look. Don't tell me what to do, he snapped. I'll handle this myself. He turned to me, a cold, calculating smile on his face. Fine, Ebner. You want to play by the rules of business? Let's play. I'll contest this bill. I'll say the signature on the contract is forged, that you misled me about the terms, that the quality of the services did not match what was advertised. I shook my head, not surprised, but still disappointed by his reaction. Please, Thorne. I have email correspondence confirming your agreement to the terms. I have witnesses who saw you and your family enjoying all the services and amenities of the house. I have photographs of the condition of the house before and after your arrival. Do you really want to go down this road? For a moment, doubt flashed in his eyes, but he quickly suppressed it. I won't pay a cent, he said firmly, and you can threaten me with court action all you want. I sighed, feeling not anger, but exhaustion and a strange sense of relief. Finally, the mask had been dropped, and the true nature of our relationship was clear for all to see. In that case, I said, taking a business card out of my pocket, here are my lawyer's contact details. He will be in touch with you in the next few days. Now, if you don't mind, I would like you all to leave my house. Your lease has expired." Meredith, who had been standing between us the whole time, suddenly took my hand. "Dad, please," she whispered. "There must be another way." I looked at my daughter, tears welling up in her eyes. It hurt me to see her suffering, but I knew that backing down now would mean returning to the way things were before, and I couldn't let that happen, not for myself nor for her. "There's always another way, sweetheart," I said gently. "Thorne can just pay the bill, and we'll forget about this incident." Thorne let out a contemptuous laugh. "Forget about it? After everything you said? After humiliating me in front of my whole family?" "I don't think so, Ebner. This is war, and you started it." I shook my head. "No, Thorne. This isn't a war. It's just business. And your choice is very simple. Either you pay the bill now or we'll see you in court. Make up your mind." January in Michigan has always been the coldest month, but this year the cold felt particularly acute. Maybe it was the incessant snowfall, or maybe it was because, for the first time in 15 years, I was spending New Year's Eve completely alone, without a call from my daughter to wish me a happy new year. 2 weeks had passed since that scene at the lake house. 2 weeks of silence, interrupted only by calls from my lawyer, Martin Faulkner, whom I had hired to deal with the unpaid bill. He was an old friend from my business days, and when I explained the situation to him, he took on the case with the enthusiasm of a bulldog that had smelled a bone. "Ebner, this is crystal clear," he said during our first meeting after the holidays. "We have a signed contract. We have email correspondence confirming your son-in-law's agreement to the terms of the lease. We have witnesses. If he decides to go to court, he will lose." I nodded, stirring the cold coffee in my mug. We were sitting in my house in Flint, where I had lived for the last 40 years. After Helena's death, I had changed almost nothing in the interior. The same heavy curtains, the same worn sofa, the same photographs on the mantelpiece. "It's not just about the money, Martin," I said. "It's about the principle. All these years, Thorne has taken advantage of me, and I've let him do it. That's not going to happen anymore." Martin looked at me intently over his glasses. "Do you realize that this could mean a complete break with your daughter? If she sides with her husband?" I sighed. It was a question that had tormented me from the moment I decided to confront Thorne. "I hope it doesn't come to that. But if I have to choose between self-respect and a relationship based on manipulation and exploitation, I choose self-respect." Martin nodded thoughtfully, and we moved on to discussing the legal details. That same day, he sent a formal letter to Thorne demanding payment of the bill within 7 days. Otherwise, the case would be taken to court. I didn't expect an immediate response. I knew Thorne would resist to the last. But to my surprise, the reply came the very next day. The letter was short and dry. Thorne agreed to pay the bill in full, but demanded written confirmation that after receiving payment, I would have no further financial claims against him. He also insisted that the payment be made through a lawyer, without personal contact. "He's trying to save face," Martin commented when I showed him the letter. "He doesn't want to admit defeat directly." I agreed to the terms. I didn't need personal triumph or Thorne's humiliation. I needed only one thing: for him to finally understand that boundaries exist and must be respected. 3 days later, Martin reported that the money had been deposited into the account. $10,000, the exact amount specified in the invoice. Not a cent more, not a cent less. "Congratulations," Martin said. "You won." But the victory had a bitter aftertaste. That same evening, Meredith called me. For the first time in 2 weeks, her voice sounded distant, as if she were talking to a stranger. "Dad," she said without greeting me, "I just wanted you to know that Thorne and I paid your bill." "I hope you're happy." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Meredith, dear, it's not about the money." "No, Dad," she interrupted, her voice breaking with tears. "It is about the money. It's always been about the money. Your business, your investments, your principles. Never about family, never about me." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Did she really think that? Did all the years of my support, all the times I came to her aid, gave her money, was there for her? Did none of that mean anything? "That's not fair, Meredith," I said quietly. "You know how much you mean to me." "Do I?" Her voice was bitter. "I used to. Now I'm not so sure. A man who loves his daughter wouldn't humiliate her husband in front of the whole family like that. He wouldn't send a bill for Christmas. A man who loves his father-in-law wouldn't use him as an ATM for years, I replied, feeling a wave of anger rising. He wouldn't bring 14 people to his house without asking and expect free accommodation. There was a long pause. I could hear her heavy breathing on the other end of the line. I can't do this anymore, Dad, she finally said. I can't be between you two. It's tearing me apart. My heart sank. Meredith, you don't have to choose. Yes, I do, she said firmly, and I choose my husband. He's my family now, and if you can't respect him, then you don't respect me either. That's not true, when I began, but she interrupted me again. Goodbye, Dad. Please don't call me. I need time. And she hung up, leaving me in the deafening silence of my empty house. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to keep myself busy, checking accounts, planning new improvements for the lake house, even starting the kitchen renovation I'd been putting off for years. But my thoughts kept returning to Meredith, to her last words, to the pain in her voice. Maybe I really had gone too far. Maybe I should have found another way to set boundaries with Thorne without making such a public scene. But even in my moments of deepest doubt, I knew I had done the right thing. Years of submission and compromise had led Thorne to believe he had the right to dispose of my property, my time, my resources. It had to end. On the third day after Meredith's call, a surprise awaited me. The doorbell rang around 4 in the afternoon, when it was already starting to get dark outside. I wasn't expecting any visitors and opened the door with some caution. Standing on the doorstep was a young man whom I didn't recognize at first. Tall, thin, with a serious expression on his face. It took me a few seconds to remember. Baxter, Thorne's nephew, the son of his brother Esmond. He was about 25, and unlike the Gwyneth twins, he was always polite and reserved. Mr. Yablonsky, he said, extending his hand. Sorry for the sudden visit. May I come in? I shook his hand, still surprised by his appearance, and stepped back to let him into the house. Of course, Baxter. Come in. What brings you to Flint? He entered, carefully wiping his feet on the doormat, and took off his jacket. I'm a senior at the University of Michigan, he explained. I was on my way to visit my parents in Detroit and decided to make a little detour to talk to you. I led him into the kitchen, the only place in the house that was warm enough at the moment because of the oven. I offered him coffee, which he gratefully accepted. So what did you want to talk about? I asked as we sat down at the table with steaming mugs. Baxter took a sip, gathering his thoughts. I wanted to apologize, he finally said, for our whole family, for how they treated you, and especially for Uncle Thorne. I was so surprised that I didn't know how to respond right away. You don't have to apologize for the actions of others, Baxter, I finally said, especially for the actions of adults who should be responsible for their own behavior. He shook his head. No, I am. Because I was there, I saw it all, and I didn't say anything. I didn't stand up for you, even though I knew you were right. I looked closely at the young man in front of me. His eyes showed a rare combination of intelligence and integrity that is not often found in someone his age. Your parents took my side, I reminded him. Your father, Esmond, was the only one who openly said that Thorne should pay. Baxter nodded. Yes, my father has always been fair, and he always criticized Uncle Thorne's attitude toward you. He said you shouldn't treat relatives that way, especially the elderly. I felt a warm wave of gratitude toward Esmond. It was always nice to know that at least someone in this family had a moral compass. After that incident at the lake house, Baxter continued, there was a real rift in the family. Grandma and Grandpa, Obadiah and Lettuce, are completely on Uncle Thorne's side. Aunt Gwyneth too. But my parents, they said they no longer wanted anything to do with that kind of behavior. My father even had a falling out with my grandfather over it. I frowned. I didn't want to be the cause of discord in a family, even one like the Rittenhouses. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. Baxter shook his head. Don't be. To be honest, it's been a long time coming. Uncle Thorne has always been a difficult person, manipulative, always trying to control everyone around him, always thinking everyone owed him something. And Grandma and Grandpa encouraged that behavior because he was their favorite. He paused, gathering his thoughts. You know, at Christmas, when you confronted him, It was the first time I'd ever seen anyone stand up to him, and it was liberating. It was as if someone had finally said out loud what we'd all been thinking for years but were afraid to say. I listened to him, feeling a strange mixture of emotions: surprise, gratitude, sadness, and a quiet satisfaction. "What about Myrith?" I finally asked. "Have you talked to her since all this happened?" Baxter's face darkened. "I saw her once, at a family dinner at Grandma and Grandpa's. She looked lost, as if she didn't quite understand what was going on. Uncle Thorne talked over her the whole time, not letting her get a word in edgewise, and she just obeyed." My worst fear had been confirmed. Meredith, my once strong, independent daughter, had completely succumbed to the influence of her manipulative husband. It was more painful than any blow. "I'm afraid for her," I admitted. "I'm afraid Thorne will completely isolate her from me, from anyone who could help her see the situation clearly." Baxter nodded, his face serious. "I'm worried about her too. But you know what? I think what you did may ultimately help her. You showed her that it's possible to stand up to Uncle Thorne, that it's possible to say no. That's an important lesson." We talked for about another hour. Baxter told me about his studies. He was studying social work and planned to help families suffering from abusive relationships. He told me about his plans to move to Chicago after graduating from university, about his girlfriend Zoe, who shared his values and aspirations. When he left, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if the weight I had been carrying on my shoulders since the conflict with Thorne had been lifted a little. I may have lost my daughter, at least for a while, but I had gained an unexpected ally and perhaps even a friend. "Come back again," I said, shaking his hand goodbye, "and say hello to your parents. Tell them I appreciate their support." Baxter smiled. "I will. And Mr. Yablonsky, don't give up. Sooner or later, Meredith will realize you were right." After he left, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about the price I had paid for my emotional freedom. It was a high price, the temporary and possibly permanent loss of my relationship with my only daughter. Was it worth it? The next morning, I woke up with unexpected clarity of thought. Yes, the price was high, but the alternative, to continue living in a toxic relationship where I was used, manipulated, and my boundaries were not respected, would have been even higher. It would have been the price of my self-respect, my dignity, my ability to look in the mirror and see a person I could be proud of. In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in work. The lake house needed some minor repairs after the Rittenhouse family's visit, and I personally took care of the restoration. I replaced a damaged chair, restored a chandelier, and ordered a new carpet to replace the ruined one. Each action was a kind of therapy, a way to restore not only the house but also myself. Darla Kincaid was delighted with my energy. "Mr. Yablonsky, you look 10 years younger," she remarked during one of our regular meetings. "Has something happened?" I smiled. "Let's just say, Darla, I've finally learned to appreciate my freedom." She didn't ask any further questions, but her understanding smile told me she guessed what had happened. Business continued to thrive. After the winter holidays, there was a slight downturn, but by the end of January, reservations for the spring weekends were coming in. People wanted to see nature awakened by the lake and enjoy the first warmth after a long winter. I continued to visit the house regularly, checking on its condition, planning improvements, and talking to Bertha and other locals who helped me keep everything in order. These trips, once just part of my business routine, had now become a real pleasure. Without Thorne's shadow hanging over me, without the constant expectation of another manipulation, I felt free in a way I hadn't felt in years. Of course, there were difficult moments. Birthdays, holidays, random reminders of Meredith. All of these caused sharp pain, a feeling of loss. I tried to contact her several times, sending short messages just to see how she was doing. There was no response. But even in those moments, I did not regret my decision, because for the first time in a long time, I felt that I was living in accordance with my values, with my understanding of right and wrong. I stopped being a victim, stopped being a convenient resource, stopped being who others wanted me to be. I became myself, Ebner Yablonsky, a man who knows his worth and knows how to defend his boundaries. One spring day, when the first flowers began to break through the melting snow, I sat on the porch of my house by the lake, watching the sunset. The water reflected the golden and pink hues of the sky, creating a picture worthy of a museum exhibition. The silence around me was broken only by the distant cries of seagulls and the gentle rustling of the wind in the pine trees. At that moment, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and I answered with some trepidation. Ebner Yablonsky speaking? Dad? Meredith's voice sounded uncertain, as if she doubted her decision to call. My heart skipped a beat. Meredith? Yes, it's me. How are you? There was a pause, and I began to fear she would hang up. Um, I, I don't know, Dad. I'm confused. Can we, can we meet? Talk? The hope I had suppressed for so long flared up with renewed strength. Of course, sweetheart. When and where? Maybe at your place. Tomorrow? I'll be in Flint for work. I'll be waiting, I replied simply. After we agreed on a time, she quickly said goodbye and hung up. But even that short conversation was enough to feel that something had changed. Her voice no longer had the same detachment, the same coldness. Instead, I heard uncertainty, maybe even fear, but also something else. Determination?